To my right, there's a man all the way from Germany, David Moufang, alias Moufdi. He has done, I don't know, almost every form of electronic music you can picture, except for Gabba maybe, and has been running a label called Source Records for years, has done electronica before the term was even invented, and yeah, please give him a very warm welcome. And like always, if you have any questions throughout the lecture, don't hesitate to ask them, just look for a microphone. Yeah, David, one person once wrote about you that if talent converted into record sales, you would be a very rich man. So, are you a rich man?
It's a good question. I would say I am, because I'm able to do what I want to do, and I don't have to do any other job, which is good. But certainly I'm not rich, but I'm surviving, it's all right.
So what is it you do? I mean, your body of work is so huge that it's pretty hard to pin it down in just a few words, right?
Yeah, probably it is. I mean, I'm into all kinds of music for a start, so I'm interested in many things, but I guess in the last few years it really turned out that in electronic music I got the strongest bounce for house music, and so that's what I'm doing mainly at the moment, but I'm also doing radio pieces, radio art, still into jazz. Yeah, it's very whatever comes along. I would also work with a singer if I had something which I really like. It's all in.
You just mentioned jazz. So you're for those people who don't know, you're coming from Heidelberg,
Yes.
A city in Germany that not only has quite a well-known university, but also a big jazz tradition. So maybe you can talk a little bit how it was for you growing up there.
Well, Heidelberg is a NATO headquarter and an American forces base, a big one. So after the World War, pretty soon they established a jazz club there, a very cool one. They had great people playing there, and For instance, Don Cherry or Carl Berger and Charlie Hayden, lots of people, cool people. I mean, I wasn't around then, but my dad was also into jazz. He was a jazz trumpeter, and he played at that club. And for instance, he remembered Carl Berger, who was a native Heidelberg vibraphone player. He was like the house player in that club, a pianist as well. He would play with anybody if they needed someone. And when Don Cherry was playing in Heidelberg, he kind of discovered him and took him to Paris, because Don Cherry was living in Paris around 65, and then 66 he moved to New York, and Carl went there with him and founded a new music school in Woodstock. And Carl Berger, just to give you an idea, I think he's about 73 years old now. And he was coming back to Heidelberg for one show when I was like 25 or something. And my parents, especially my dad, said, "You have to go, you have to see this guy, he's really cool." And so I went, and I was really blown away, and that's how I got in touch with him. I asked him, would he be interested in doing something with electronics, and he said, basically, yes, but first you should earn your merits or whatever, then we can talk about it. And maybe 2 years later, he phoned me up from New York, and he said, "Well, I'm just in Bill Laswell's studio, and I saw your CD lying around there." And I guess this was the moment when he got really interested, and this is how we started the conjoint collaboration, or band, group, whatever, with Carl Berger.
And who is Bill Laswell, for those people who might
Bill
not know?
Laswell, for those who don't know, he's a big, big producer, maybe everybody should know Rocket by Herbie Hancock. That was a Bill Laswell production. And it's very typical of his sound more than it is of Herbie Hancock's sound. So his influence on this number was really particularly big, I would say. And since then, he's done, I don't know, hundreds of records, and he's been working and producing, for instance, material with Sly and Robbie and George Clinton and Bootsy Collins. He knows them all, so it's that scene, New York. And lately, he went into dub ambient stuff and also collaborating with Jonah Sharp or Pete Namlock. These are people that I work with as well.
Okay, and yeah, that piece with Carl Berger, you have it with you, maybe?
I got one piece here, and it's not so long. We've done 3 albums so far, 2 studio albums, and 1 is a live CD, which is the most recent one from 2006. And I'm going to play a piece of an album called Earprints. It's only 3 minutes. This is from a live recording. It's a lot more abstract, and I go somewhere in the middle of the track.
But jazz as a big influence in your life, with your father being a trumpeter, there also came like, this whole DJ thing pretty soon for you, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. You mentioned Heidelberg as a NATO place, so there were obviously not only jazz clubs, but later on also so-called GI discos.
Yeah, I've never been to one though.
Never?
No. But I started DJing in '87, and Techno wasn't there yet, and it was kind of a mainstream discotheque in town, and they played black music mainly, like funk and hip-hop and stuff like this, and among the people going there were a lot of GIs, so I got to meet these people, and I always wanted to go to the US clubs, but I never really made it, unfortunately. But maybe it's also worthwhile mentioning that because of the Americans in town, they also had their own AFN, Air Force networks or whatever, Army network, radio station, and this was pretty cool to listen to as well, as opposed to the German crappy stations.
So what were some of the things, bands, artists that influenced you then back at that time, listening to AFN?
It's difficult. I guess a lot of things I didn't know what they were, and I wasn't speaking English then, so I couldn't really understand what they were saying either. But in general, it was a different sound to what the European or German stations were playing, which was the same all across the board, like Top 40, and they just had their own style, and I certainly heard the first interesting funk records that weren't really on the radio in Germany, like whatever Parliament and George Clinton, this kind of stuff they should have played.
And you weren't speaking English back then?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't born speaking English.
But you were already in your teens, right? So.
Well, I don't know when I started listening to AFN. I was around 4 years old when I realized that music would be the thing for me in a way.
4 years?
4 years old, and really
You're
being
sure?
into the Beatles. Absolutely, I quite remember records I was playing then, and I was really listening to them, like the same record for 8 times in a row, and I felt like I knew every single note, even though I couldn't play any instrument, and and then it took a while. My parents were trying to send me to some music school, but this was all really lame, so I didn't really have the nerve to do it. And later on, when I was 10, maybe I started taking lessons for drums first, and then guitar and piano as well.
So becoming a lawyer, an architect, or a policeman was never...
No, an astronaut was the only other thing which interested me. But my dad told me, with your bad eyesight,
They will never
they
let
would
you
never
into space.
let me into space, so I had to make my own little... I mean, actually, I was building a lot of like pseudo spaceships with Lego and stuff, and fake headphones and walkie-talkies, so I was kind of technically interested, and the studio at least has a lot of buttons and knobs and lights, and it's a bit like a cockpit, so
Maybe that's why you ended up there. But you never built your own instruments then?
Not really, no.
And would you recommend people to, if you want to become a music producer, to pick up like drum or guitar lessons, or have like this classical
background? I don't know. I mean, throughout the 90s, I had the impression that, or I often wish that I wouldn't know anything about music, because a lot of really interesting stuff was coming from a really experimental angle or approach. And sometimes if you know what you can do and what you cannot do, you're kind of limited in what you're trying to do. So I wouldn't say it's necessary to play an instrument to produce music, but on the other hand, now we're not in the 90s, we're in the 2000s, and things are changing, guitars are coming back. I happen to be a guitar player, so it comes in handy now, and it's before. I mean, in the 90s, I would not admit that I'm playing the guitar because it was so uncool. And now it's a lot more easy. So I think it depends on what you want to do. You can do it without, but it is all right if you know stuff, or if you're a drummer and you learn some stuff, and you can. It's maybe not such a random approach to the computer. You have more a concept of what you're aiming at and how to do it, and where the one is, or what is the one in a bar, and the concept of a bar and all this is maybe easier, but it's not necessary, no.
But speaking of computers, aren't the endless possibilities these days not confusing then?
It's a curse, really. I mean, like when I started off with electronic music, it was around 1990, and it was like the Roland machines, 909, 606, and a mixer, and Atari computer probably in Europe, and so you were really limited to the gear you had, and which was kind of nice, you know. If you wanted something else, you had to get rid of another element to get that machine so you can use it, and there was a natural limitation to what you are doing, and and also the sounds back then, a lot of the synthesizers, they weren't even programmable or storable, so you had the sound, but if you just waited for a day, it may have wandered somewhere else without even touching it, so you had to get stuff down on a tape immediately in a way, otherwise it would be gone, and it's not easy, or it's impossible even to reproduce, which adds a certain value to whatever you're doing, you know. It may be wrong, parts of it, but some parts of it you think, how did I get this sound, and I will never get it again, which really added a value to the stuff, where as today you all store it in your computer and you can work on it forever, and you can add and add, and there are no limits, and I don't think it's very helpful in order to finish something, you know. When is a track finished is always a difficult question, but it's even more difficult if there's no end to what you can do.
So when is a track finished for you then?
Maybe when the deadline is up, probably, or if somebody else tells me it's finished. It's really hard to tell. I can't even say how long it takes. Sometimes it goes really quickly, and often those quick shots are the better ones. So it may only take 2 hours to do a full track. But usually you get the feeling, only 2 hours, this can't be it. There's got to be some sweat and work involved, and then you start sometimes ruining it, you know. Sometimes it's best the way it is done first, and then when you try to define it, you water it down, and it gets really boring and shallow. It's a difficult question I can't answer when it is finished.
But you just said when someone else tells you, what's quite like a red line throughout your work is that you never hesitated to work with other people. So you weren't really the bedroom producer on his own, right?
No, it's rather even the opposite. I mean, I do have a history like playing in bands with guitars, and for me, music is about communication. I mean, I communicate with the people listening to the music, but more interesting is the part while creating it, if you communicate or deal with another person. So I'm very much into collaborations of all sorts, because also I think when you work with someone, mostly you got like a limited time frame, like 2 days or something, and then you want to see what you can do in 2 days, and naturally the approach won't be like, oh, I'll do everything I do, it's got to be perfect, it's got to be 110%, but you can't do it like this, so you do it really instantly, spontaneous, and of course there will be always things or aspects in the music where I think artists could have been better, but on the long term, I think even if there's flaws to it or mistakes in it, it's nicer like this. If it's something where you can tell two people meeting and doing something quickly, I'm totally up for it. Yeah.
But you always also have to compromise then, right?
Of course you do, and sometimes the other one brings in something you don't like, you know, and if you absolutely hate it, you would tell him, of course, but it's kind of embarrassing, so you try to work with it and deal with it, and it can be really interesting. Maybe something I wouldn't have thought of, I wouldn't have done. In the end, I do like it, and so I think it's always a great way of learning new things as well if you work with different people.
And you said that you were a bit ashamed of admitting that you played the guitar in the 90s. So why was that? Did you buy into that whole techno philosophy back then, that no one has to be a pop star? And
yeah, totally. I mean, I did really buy that approach of like the music has to speak for itself, and it's not important who you are or how you look, and it wasn't cool in the 90s to put out records under your real name. Nowadays it's quite common, but back then nobody did. Everybody had a fake name and trying to be anonymous as far as they could. And I sort of like the idea still, because after all it's the music that matters and not how somebody's looking or who is he going out with or stuff like this. But yeah, obviously it just didn't last very long. I mean, the DJ within, I don't know, 2-3 years, in my impression, took the role of the rock star, and he was up there on this kind of high stage again, and the big discrepancy between the people, the party people, and the DJ, it's horrible. I mean, still today clubs are laid out like this. I hate it. I much rather play down on the floor and give everybody the chance to whatever, yell at me and say, play something cool, you fool. I think it's much better than if you can hardly see what's happening there.
But maybe you could elaborate a bit on what attracted you then to techno, coming from that jazz funk background.
Obviously it wasn't the music in the first place. I do remember the first acid house parties I went to. because people were saying, you have to go, it's crazy. And
you bought a Smiley T-shirt for that?
no, I was not. I was never really fashionable in that way, but I felt like an alien there in a way. And people also were younger. I mean, how old was I in '88? 22. That's not really that old, but a lot of the others were like 16. I guess most of them were. And
where was that?
'88. I must have been Planet Base in Normal, or how was it called?
In Heidelberg.
In Heidelberg, yeah. And so it wasn't for the music, and like the hits at that time, around that time, like Beat This, S-Express, Pump Up the Volume, like this late 80s. This is all UK music, and at that time there was already the cool Chicago stuff, which I hadn't heard about. And
like Mr. Fingers.
Like
Robert
Mr.
Owens.
Fingers, but this kind of music wasn't played at those parties. It was really this UK kind of thing. And I wasn't too crazy about the music, but the people and the whole scenery, it really blew my mind. Having started DJing in '87 in a mainstream club, I knew the rules as they existed then. It was like the bouncer would be instructed, look at the people, if they're wearing sneakers, send them off. If they look like they got a big wallet and they want to spend their money on booze, let them in. And of course, this doesn't help much to create a nice atmosphere or get good party people in. These were just stupid people in a way. And on these house parties, it was the opposite. You know, you could see black people, Turk people, all ethnics mixed, and poor people, rich people, funny dressed people, straight dressed people. It was all right, you know. And I actually do remember one night when I was just sitting there and watching the scenery, and one guy, a young raver, was coming to me and he was saying like, "You're looking kind of pale. Are you all right? Do you have a bad pill, maybe?" And I said, "No, I'm fine. I'm just listening." And this was really so striking for me because in the rock business, you know, big festivals, people, they would trample on you, and nobody gives a damn, you know, if you're feeling bad, or they rather hit you with their beer bottle or whatever. And now was this, and I was really overwhelmed. I thought, well, this is a new generation, and to me it felt as important as the late 60s, like
a hippie thing.
The hippie movement, like a real a new era with new values or new ways of interacting with people, and I very much like that. So I accepted the music for the benefits of the nice party crowd. And then it didn't take long to discover all the good music that existed around then, in like 1990, 1991. As you mentioned already, Mr. Fingers, Robert Owens, but also the UK network label did a great job in combining like Sheffield and Detroit stuff and putting them out on compilations called Biorhythms. It's a very good recommendation, I think. And up till now, like on Biorhythms 1, the first track, Self-Hypnosis, Archer Pete, they're also known as Alternate. Which
on Nexus 21, I
Nexus
think.
21, yeah. But that is Archer Pete, and is there other outing? I mean, they were most popular for Alternate, which was like really hardcore banging UK rave. And with Nexus 21, they did kind of intelligent techno, whatever you want to call it, but it's very intriguing, very cool stuff. It's a bummer I don't have it here.
You don't have it here, I guess, yeah. But yeah, intelligent techno is another term that was also applied to your music, right?
Yeah. Well, I do hate electronica. I think I hate it more than intelligent, although I never liked intelligent because this is kind of...
kind of stupid?
Kind of stupid and kind of self-important or whatever. I hate terms in music anyway. What's that saying? Talking about music is like dancing about architecture. I can very well go with that.
Unfortunately, we are talking about music right now. But you did an album very early in your career then, called Kunststoff. and you put it out on your own label, Source Records.
Yes.
So maybe we could listen to something from Kunststoff to give people an idea what you were doing back then, as opposed to the jazz-influenced stuff.
Yeah, maybe we should say the very first things we did, or I did, was kind of ambient music, and it was very much influenced by Chill Out KLF and probably the Orb as well, and so that was ambient, and obviously there were some other ambient artists at that time. And then there was techno, like Detroit techno, Frankfurt techno, but techno. And in between, I felt there was like a huge gap of an open field, and that's why I tried to come in with when I did Kunststoff. And well, yeah, this is not it. Maybe I should play this. This is actually the first tech. This one is called 77 Sunset Strip.
It's a bit like dubstep, huh?
Yeah, it sounds different, I would say.
Is that something you're into, like dubstep, new music?
Yeah, I try to be open for it. I mean, as a DJ, I find it kind of hard to mix it in, to make it work, but at home it's different, and I try to listen to it, and I like some stuff a lot.
And you put Kunststoff out on Source Records, your own label, which you started together with Jonas Grossman.
Yeah.
So maybe, what was the impulse to do a label of your own?
I guess we were not ready to go through this process of sending demos that get never listened to probably, and all these frustrating things, so we decided we just do it ourselves, which was clever at that point, I think, because we were trying to do albums and there were hardly any albums, so it was pretty easy for us to kind of pop into the market, and we got a lot of nice response, especially from the UK, but eventually from all around the world. And initially it was just the idea to do this one record, Jonas and I, and do it ourselves, and there wasn't the plan to do a label really, but it kind of self-dynamically evolved like this, that there was a demand, and there were people coming first, there were friends from around Heidelberg, but pretty soon, I think on the second or third release, we already had people from Canada, so internationally we got demos, and so we just went on, but we never really had the focus on like financial success. We were more interested in like finding new things, and we were particularly interested in releasing stuff where we thought nobody else would put it out. So I mean, we still do get a lot of demos from people that I have names and have records out, but it's not so challenging. I think it's much more challenging if you bring something, if you can confront the people with something really new. For instance, we had this one CD, it was just a prepared piano being played live to 2-track and nothing else, and I don't know if any of you heard about prepared piano, how it sounds. It's very abstract. You treat the piano with pieces of paper or rubber or nails. You put them on the strings, you open it and you put this stuff on the strings, and it totally changes the sonic appearance of the piano. It could be gamelan, but it could also be like synthesizers, and people were actually taking it for synthesizer music. I remember at the record store somebody was kind of taking back the CD, was saying, "This is crap, the sequencing isn't tight," and he totally didn't understand or realize that this was just a piano and somebody playing it. And it's funny though, I mean, we only did 500 of this, and never expected to make money on it, which we didn't, but it was really nice because it gave me the contacts to interesting people like Square Pusher or Jamie Hodge. These were people that were really excited about it and called me up therefore, and I was saying, "Oh, this is crazy! And how did you find this?" Lately, it was quite a triumphant feeling, even that Richard James was using a lot of prepared piano.
Who's Richard James?
FX Twin. I thought that's a given.
But
who's FX Twin?
Yeah, who's FX Twin?
He's the guy from that orange ad.
But you never had a real office or like a full-blown label?
No, we never had
management?
any employees, for instance. Yeah, we always did it as a two-man business.
And would you recommend to someone to
do a label?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I would recommend it to anybody who's looking for money, to make money. But if somebody really has a strong affection for music and contacts and can afford to do it in a way, I would still do it, even though these days are really tough business-wise and most labels are complaining. But on the other hand, I feel that for really small underground labels, the time isn't so bad. It's probably hurts those the most that deserve to be hurt.
But Source is also in kind of a hibernation mode, right?
Yeah.
For a few years now, but that...
Last release was in 2005. And the reason was after EFA, which was the biggest European independent distributor, went bankrupt in 2004. We were left with enormous loss, money which they owed us and was never being paid, and the records were sold, so we had neither the money nor the CDs or the vinyl. And but yet we had to pay all those bills like GEMA or RPS, like the royalties and manufacturing, pay artists. So it was a real financial stress. And at that point, my partner Jonas decided that he has to move on and find a job and make some money. And and the label has been on hold since then, or on pause. Because I also wanted to get back into the music making myself again more, and the more I work for the label, the less I was able to work on my own music, and so at the moment there's nothing happening, but I will put out stuff on Source eventually, but I guess the next time it will be only my own stuff or real friends, not as a real business label anymore.
So before we listen to something that you're made more current and that's maybe done for clubs, you mentioned the utopia that attracted you to that whole techno thing, you know, like the melting pot of people all in peace with each other. Do you think this is still valid today? Like you play quite a lot as a DJ.
I play a lot, and I would still say that probably techno, I mean, for me it's all techno, including dubstep and house and everything. It's all techno. Techno people are still the nicest crowds you can find. I mean, I don't have a great time whenever I go to a hip-hop event, or nor do I when I go to a rock thing. Maybe jazz people are all right, but they're usually older and boring. So I think techno people are the best party people still. But a lot of that utopia, as I said, has vanished pretty soon, like with that big DJ stardom and the differentiation between those on stage and those not on stage. That's a pity.
And the drugs have changed as well, right?
Yeah, but the drugs are coming back as well. I mean, have they changed? I mean, E's were there then and they're here now. And maybe people were doing more acid in the early 90s, which I think is a more creative or evolutionary drug. Maybe it's not just a good time. It asks you some questions. So I think it's worthwhile a try, maybe.
We don't want to promote any drug use here.
Except for Red Bull.
Yeah, except for Red Bull. But you actually had a record on Source, right? Which was like a tribute.
Devoted to the 50th anniversary of LSD, yes. It wasn't really my idea, but I happened to go to a lecture by Albert Hofmann when he was like 88 years old. Now,
Albert Hofmann.
The inventor of, or the discoverer, we should say, of LSD. He died this year, 101 or 2 years old.
Something.
Over 100, for sure. And he's an extremely interesting person. He was working as a chemist at Sandoz in Basel, and he was looking for heart medicine. So by accident, he came across LSD, and so this guy is not a guru or esoteric or whatever.
Unlike Timothy Leary.
Unlike all these other people, and I have a much harder time to listen to them because they always kind of mix it with their own idea or concept of the world, how it should be and all this. But Albert Hofmann was really interesting because he was like this scientist guy and with a really rational approach. But then when he talked about it, he said like, and then I realized that there is another reality. It had a lot different impact than if one of those freaked out dudes would say that. So, and he was never promoting it or agitating it. He was saying you have to be really careful and it's meant for the shaman people. But yeah, very interesting.
But what shall we listen to now? You brought a few records, right? From
brought a few recent records. I don't know, maybe you should pick some. This one here is on Usuri, is a relatively new London label. And yeah, we were saying it's more like house music. I mean, I've been DJing forever and I've been doing the music, but there was always a problem for me because as a DJ, I wasn't really an ambient DJ, but I was doing these ambient records. So people booked me for ambient events. I got really bored. And so there was always this. So this was obviously a lot more compatible, but I'm still trying to do different stuff as well. This is on Workshop, some kind of slow disco. There was a sample in there. I mean, like on Kunststoff, what we were listening to before, I don't use any samples really. And for a long time, this was like my philosophy as well, not to sample, and like in this one, the last loop coming in, it was Bohannon. And
you're not allowed to say that.
But I do, because that's why I'm using it. Sometimes it's really important for me to kind of show a little reference in a way, you know. I think it's a nice way of, I don't know, showing your appreciation, yeah.
But you should also pay
royalties.
Royalties then.
Not for a tambourine loop. Come on.
The tune you played before that on Workshop was done with Thomas Meinecke, right?
Yeah.
Who is like a band member of FSK.
Yes, a German independent band.
Yeah, and also I don't know how to describe it, a book author who's trying to mix up all kinds of academic theory with pop music or dance music or whatever, and you two work quite a lot together.
Yeah, we've been doing pieces for the radio since 1998, and It happened because he is a band member of FSK and author on Surkamp, which is a really well-renowned publisher in Germany. And he's also a DJ at that radio, public radio in Germany, Bayerischer Rundfunk, which is a bit like the BBC in Britain. It's a high-quality public radio. And Dave asked him when he had a new book coming, don't you want to do something about your book, like a radio play? And he said yes, and they said, they asked him if he had any idea who he wants to work with, and he said he would like to do it with me. And the reason was that that book was taking place in Heidelberg, my hometown, and maybe because of that reason, but for any reason, people are listening to Kunststoff and Source Records, and it's mentioned throughout the book. And so he thought it would be natural to ask me to do it, and I was really hesitant in the beginning because it's not always easy to work with different people. If they're not friends and you don't know them, it can be really awkward.
So you thought he's a stalker?
Yeah, whatever. And but I let myself being talked into, and now I have to say it was really clever to do it because he's a great guy. He's great fun to work with, and in the 10 years now we've done I don't know how many, 5 maybe or 6 pieces, and this year we actually won a big prize. They're called the Karl Schucker Prize, which seems to be like one of the top prizes for radio art. And before we were starting the session, there was actually something of that prize-winning thing playing, and it's bilingual, so I may give you another example. It's called Translations, Übersetzungen, and we wanted, this time we didn't want to base it on a novel or a book that he's written, but to use the voice or the text in a really improvised way, make it like weave it in with the music, and yeah, which one now? Maybe they really know that's not a good one because it's not as translated. What do you want to hear? More techno, more jazz, more techno, or maybe this one is quite good. I have to go back because it has it.
You said that you were using hardware before, but do you do all stuff in the computer now, or you use hardware with Ableton?
I still use hardware a lot, and a lot of these audio files, loops that we're hearing, they're not being done with the computer, but recorded hardware, and then it's in here, and I can take it to a gig, but at home in the studio, I still use hardware a lot, yeah.
What kind of?
I mean, like, I think the instrument which really fascinated me the most for the last 6 years maybe is the Node Modular, which is a hardware synthesizer which you edit using a computer, and then it gives you like the modules as we know them from modular systems like the old ones, Moog and Roland's, and or nowadays Stopfers, which has like separate units for like envelopes, oscillators, filters, and then you wire it up, but it's not as complicated as in Max MSP or Reactor. It's really simple. Very much like the patch bay here on the MS-20, you pull some wires and then you work with it. And you only need the computer to build these instruments, but you don't need the computer to create the sound. So once you're done with the programming, you can just take the keyboard, or there's also like rack modules, small things. You can take that to a gig and it will create the sound, and you won't need the computer anymore. And I think it's a really stunning instrument because if you know how a subtractive synthesis is working, the basic old school method of like filtering down and 2 or 3 oscillators, LFO, this kind of architecture of a synthesizer, if you understand this, it's very instant with an old modular. You don't have to read the manual. You can just go and do your stuff. And so this is a really inspiring piece of hardware for me. And I'm just checking if I can find a good example. Let's pray. This is actually on the... It is, thanks. This is Studio Pankow. Is a I don't know. Schlaum seemed to be interested in kind of old school, vintage sounding stuff, and I have from that period. I've got, I don't know, about 20 hours of unreleased material. I mean, it's not all as good as Drone. That's why he picked it, but also like the Sheffield Dance on the other, Modern Love 12 I did is also like this old. And back then, all these 20 hours of material, it was made in a communal studio we had in Heidelberg. It was a little small rotten house with 2 rooms in there, and we had 8 people having keys to the house, and slowly we set up a studio in there, a really low profile, but a really nice one at the same time. There was no computer.
What was the studio called?
KM20. KM20 was also the name of a sub-label where we put out stuff from the house. KM20 was derived from the address it was in, and it was really nice because people come into Heidelberg, we all brought them to KM20, and they all been jamming there, Chez Damier, FX Twin, Baby Ford, the Mego guys, lots of people, and it was like a little nice guest book because they all left their little memory by doing something there in this setup. And I was just about explaining how the studio was set up. There was no computer, it was all CV gate, so it wasn't a virtual modular studio, it was a real modular studio. And the nice thing about these kind of studios is one instrument is like the master, giving the clock for everything which is running, probably the 808, and if you press start, there's always something happening. It can be really bad and horrible, but something is happening because the trigger out of the 808 goes into the SH09, which is going through the filters of the MS20. And so for friends that aren't really familiar with this kind of setup, it was very inviting because they just had to press start and something was happening. Then I could show them, yeah, if you touch this knob and do this, then maybe this will be changed, or if you don't like the rhythm of this, it's been controlled by this sequencer, just change the steps, and yeah, and so there are hours of material from that place. And the problem is we've been recording onto cassette, straight cassette first, and later on we had a DAT machine, but it's always 2-track recording, so if there's one element really wrong, then the whole thing is not really usable, but there's enough material which...
And did you name the recordings, the cassettes, or is it all?
To me, they all have names. I mean, if I go through my iTunes and I put in KM20, you will see a pretty long list of stuff, and this is not complete, but I don't know, for instance, what Super Dinky sounds like. It's actually a really nice one, I think. So this is there's somebody who cares, you know. I mean, I've always done music, maybe not as much as I'm doing now, but I never gave up on it. But it certainly helps if there's a demand, you know, if there's friends saying, can you not do something for me? And it really helps. And other than this, I don't really have a fixed mind about what I'm doing. Like it has to be this kind of method. I like to explore stuff. I love this kind of analog setup, but I also like to sit down with just one machine. It could be a GM, General MIDI, sound box, and see what I can get out of this. And musically, it's a bit the same. One day I wake up and I feel like uplifting to decide for myself what of the elements that are there do I like personally, and I may keep those, and I throw away everything which I don't really like, and then I start playing over it. And yeah, sometimes it can be really, the result can be really nothing like the original. Sometimes it is pretty close to the original. It depends on the track. Here's a recent remix, which I kind of like. It's not there. This one is. It's a mini-log track. It's not for me, because if someone is having troubles and not getting the money, maybe the other one is more lucky, so you balance out the risk. You know, if you bind yourself to one label and they go bust, then you're just fucked, you know. And but basically, I think that they're all friends. I wouldn't really do it for anybody. I mean, Gerd is a friend. The guy who does Philpot is a friend. Schlom and Taddy are friends, and so it's a natural development. And so far, there wasn't a real problem because everybody has their own idea and concept of music, and so far it never happened that somebody was saying, "Oh, you gave that track to this guy, and I really wanted it." So it hasn't been a problem yet.
How do you think, what will happen with techno music in the next few years?
In the next 2 years?
Few years.
Few years. I'm sure that techno, again, I'm saying it with this really wide expression, everything is techno, and this will prevail, definitely. I mean, it will go on because it's the most internationally used approach. I mean, people who have a computer at home, and almost everybody has, is in a position to do stuff like this. And I was saying before in some interviews that I feel nowadays there's more producers actually than people actually buying or listening to techno records. And I think this will go on like this, that there will be many, many people working in a field of computer music or computer-based music. And naturally, there's a lot of crap, but there's also some really good stuff. And I think it will change, like new facets, like dubstep or other things will come up, and house will be trendy or not trendy, or disco or techno, but that's just the subcategories. But the whole thing, it will be in motion and it will be there. I mean, not even death metal or this kind of really old stuff, it hasn't died, and there's still people doing it, but maybe on a really small scale. But techno, I think it's everywhere, and even people doing films, they are tempted to do their own soundtrack because it's really easy now, and I think it's totally right, and it should go on like this. But I'm sure that what we are experiencing since the 80s, like in the 80s, it was still like you like Duran Duran or Madonna or Michael Jackson. There wasn't so much, you know, and I had the feeling I could go to a record store and slowly work my way through all the shelves and know about everything which was there, which was not 100% true, but maybe 80% true. And nowadays, I would say, even for people like us who deal with it professionally, it's absolutely no way to know what's going on, you know. I mean, we find some good stuff, but always knowing that we don't know about good stuff which is happening at the same time, because there's not enough time to hear all this. And as a reversed effect, people were selling millions of records in the 80s, and now they're selling hundreds or thousands to smaller groups. And I think this kind of phenomena, it will last, you know. But I think there's nothing wrong about it. It's fine, you know. I think it also shows that people are a lot more educated or self-confident. Now, back then, it was like you had to have what everybody else has. Nowadays, I think you're only cool if you have something that nobody else has, and you can show them, this is my special record, and it's really kind of cool. But it's nice, you know, because it should be like this. People should have a strong relation to the music they like, even if they just consumers. It's perfect if they say, I love this so much, and I really want to promote it. And yeah, I think it's perfect. I personally don't have a problem with like the big stardom, big major record companies all going down the drain. It's not a problem for me. And networking, I mean, there's a lot of nostalgia when you talk about techno, and it's happening to me as well. I remember I idealized the early 90s as the like gold mining age of techno, where it was also new, and you could meet people like Ortega and all these other heroes of mine. They were really nice people, and you were friends, and it was a small network in your hometown.
Now you have MySpace.
That's where I'm aiming at. This was back then in the 90s. Then I felt like everything fell apart, like big companies coming in, promoting and making it a major business, but at the same time like superstardom, and you don't really connect as a network in the scene anymore. And personally, I must say I was really, I still am a fan of MySpace, even if it's owned by Rupert Murdoch, and I don't really like all what's behind that. Doesn't matter for me. The important thing is that I start networking again on a really low level with anybody. All of you could send me emails, and I might not reply the next day. Maybe it would take weeks. Maybe some of you wouldn't get an answer because I just didn't make it. But in general, I try to respond to everything, and I love like. I've just started working with an agency again, like booking gigs, which is cool and save money, but I totally like the way I did it like for the last couple of years through MySpace, only on a direct level, and people from somewhere in Belgium or Spain were saying, yeah, we do this little party, we don't have much money, but we would love you to come. And I must say, I never ever had a single bad experience like this. It was always really nice people, whereas if I go with the agency, I get my money usually. And I'm not saying it's all bad, but it does happen that I get to places and I think, why am I here? What the fuck, you know? I mean, the DJ before and after me, it's a different world. I don't like anybody really. There's nobody really who seems to be interested in me. The promoter is really like, yeah, here's it, money and blah blah. There's a hotel, fuck off. And it's such a difference, and that's why I really like this MySpace networking thing. And you get to meet people and on a small scale, and it's all really good.
One more question.
Did you have any difficulties by like giving out or like bringing out or playing different styles under one name? Like, did it have any difficulties for you?
Well, it's hard to answer because I don't know where I would be if I'd done it all differently. I can only say the way I did it it's not working out too badly for me. It's okay. Sometimes I have a feeling that people who like one aspect of my work, they don't even know about the stuff I'm also doing. And if they knew, they would probably wouldn't really care much about it. So what, he does that as well. I never felt like because he's also doing this, I don't believe he's a true househead or anything. So I was lucky in that respect. And I did say earlier on that there was a problem for me going to DJ and producing really down-tempo music. There was a discrepancy which wasn't so cool. Like the places I got booked didn't always really fit, I felt. But these days, it's no problem. It's really nice. And I think this is really yesterday approach if you think you can only do one thing, you know. I mean, as a matter of fact, I do like people who stand for one sound and they do it all their lives, like whatever Larry Heard is fine for me, but I also really like people who show some changes, like Square Pusher or Miles Davis or the Beatles. You know, if I can see where they're moving and that their horizon is not limited to these parameters, but they're open to other things. I think essentially that's important for music to be open, you know. Otherwise, it would be wrong, you know. And even if I reflect a lot on old school house music these days, I wouldn't say I'm trying to imitate it or copy it. First of all, I was there back then. I'm part of it in a way. But also, I think it's still, it doesn't quite sound as it did sound back then, you know. So I think first of all, you shouldn't think too much about what you're doing. Just do it. I really need to have a wee.
So if there aren't any more questions, this is a nice way to end it. Just do it. And yeah, Moufang will show you his nice special records tonight at Macarena. And yeah, please pick the man like Moufang up. Thank you for coming.